The skies over Earth burned. Fire rained down from the heavens as massive alien warships hovered above the planet, unleashing destruction. Entire cities were reduced to rubble in minutes. The people of Earth had no warning, no chance to defend themselves. The invaders came from the Zorith Empire, a species that had ruled the galaxy for centuries. To them, humanity was nothing more than an insignificant race, weak and primitive. The Zorith had conquered hundreds of worlds, and Earth was just another target. Commander Velker stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Devourer, watching the destruction unfold on the screens before him. The humans were running, hiding, screaming. Their military forces were barely a challenge. "They fight like insects," Velker scoffed, turning to his second-in-command. "I told the Council this would be easy. By the end of the cycle, Earth will be ours." His officers laughed. The human resistance was weak. Their fighter jets were nothing against Zorath's energy weapons. Their ground soldiers were brave, but bravery meant nothing against orbital bombardment. Within hours, Earth's major cities, New York, Beijing, London, Moscow, were all in ruins. The invaders had expected this war to take weeks. Instead, it seemed to be ending in mere days. But then, something changed. The message. Across all Zorith communication channels, a transmission appeared. It was sent from a hidden human base, deep underground. The screen flickered, and a single human stood in the shadows. His face was covered in dirt, his uniform torn, but his eyes burned with something Velker had not expected. Rage. The human's voice was calm, but his words were like thunder. "You started this war. Now face the consequences." Then silence. Velker frowned. He had seen many species break under Zorith rule. They begged for mercy, surrendered, or tried to escape. But this was different. Something about the way the human spoke sent a chill through the room. The silence before the storm. Over the next few hours, Zorith ships hovered in Earth's orbit, waiting for surrender. But humanity did not surrender. Instead, Earth went silent. No more distress signals. No more emergency broadcasts. Nothing. The resistance had vanished underground, their locations unknown. The surviving military bases stopped transmitting. Even the human satellites, once flooding space with signals, had gone dark. It was as if the planet itself had held its breath. Velker felt uneasy. This was not normal. In every past invasion, the defeated species had tried to negotiate, fight back, or flee, but humanity had done none of these things. Then, reports started coming in. Zorith scout ships sent to search the ruins of human cities never returned. Troops deployed on the ground vanished without a trace. Soldiers reported hearing strange sounds at night, whispers, footsteps, something moving in the shadows. And then, the first Zorith battleship disappeared. One moment it was patrolling Earth's atmosphere. The next, it was gone. No distress call, no explosion, no wreckage. Just gone. Velker's blood ran cold. The war was not over. It was just beginning. Velker paced the bridge of the Devourer, his claws tapping against the cold metal floor. Something was wrong. Earth should have been begging for mercy by now, but instead, it had gone silent. No distress calls, no resistance movements trying to fight back, just pure, unsettling quiet. His officers whispered among themselves. Reports were coming in from the ground forces, and they weren't good. Squads of Zorith soldiers had entered the ruins of human cities, searching for survivors, only to disappear without a trace. No bodies were found, no signs of struggle, just empty streets and abandoned weapons. It was as if the humans had simply vanished into thin air. Velker ordered a scout team to investigate. A dozen drones were sent down first, scanning the wreckage for any heat signatures. At first, nothing appeared on the screens. Then, a single reading. Faint, but there. It was moving, fast, darting between collapsed buildings. Before the drones could focus their sensors, the signal was gone. One by one, The drones lost contact. Frustrated, Velker deployed an elite unit of Zorath hunters. They were the best of the best, trained to track and eliminate enemy forces. He watched their helmet feeds as they moved through the ruins, weapons raised, scanning for any sign of human life. The first few minutes were uneventful. The city was dead. Then, a scream cut through the silence. The video feed from one of the soldiers flickered violently before turning to static. Another soldier shouted, spinning in circles, weapon raised, but there was nothing there. More screams followed. Then silence. Within minutes, the entire squad was gone. Velker's grip tightened around the command console. This wasn't normal. He had fought countless wars, crushed rebellions, wiped out entire civilizations. But this was different. The humans weren't fighting like a desperate species facing extinction. They were waiting. A new report flashed onto his screen. One of the Zorath warships in low orbit had disappeared. No explosion. No wreckage. Just gone. The ship's crew had reported seeing something just before they lost contact. Something moving in space, too fast for their scanners to track. Velker's second-in-command hesitated before speaking. "Sir, we should pull back. Regroup." Velker's eyes narrowed. "No, we finish this." A transmission suddenly appeared on every Zorath ship's screen. It was the same human from before, his face still covered in dirt, his uniform still torn. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with something deeper. "You should have left us alone." Then the screen went black. Warning sirens erupted across the ship. More battleships were vanishing. And now, Velker realized the horrifying truth. Humanity had never been defenseless. They had been hunting. "You said." Velker clenched his fists as alarms blared across the Devourer. Another warship had vanished. That made 5 in the last hour. There were no explosions, no distress signals, just a flicker on the scanners before each vessel was gone. The fleet, which had once surrounded Earth in an unbreakable grip, was now full of empty spaces where mighty battleships had once floated. Panic spread through the Zorath ranks. Soldiers whispered of ghosts, of shadows moving between the stars. The officers spoke of sabotage, but Velker knew better. This wasn't sabotage. This was something far worse. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were playing a game, and they were winning. A new alert flashed across his screen. This time, it wasn't another missing ship. It was worse. A single human warship had appeared on the edge of the battlefield. One ship, alone against the entire Zorath fleet. It was an old design, primitive compared to the Empire's dreadnoughts. Velker almost laughed at the arrogance. Then the scans came in. It wasn't just any warship. It was unregistered, a ghost. There were no records of its existence, no history of its design, and most disturbingly, there was no crew detected. The readings showed nothing alive on board. Velker's second-in-command turned to him, his voice unsteady. "Sir, what if the humans aren't alone?" The thought sent a chill through him. The Zorath had conquered countless species, broken the will of entire civilizations, but humanity was different. They had fought no major galactic wars, had never shown true power, yet now they had disappeared into the dark, only to return as something unrecognizable. Velker gritted his teeth. He refused to believe in myths. Target the warship. Destroy it. His crew obeyed. The Zorath fleet opened fire, beams of energy lashing out at the lone human vessel. The blasts connected. Direct hits. But when the light faded, the warship was still there, untouched. And then it moved. Faster than anything the Zorath had ever seen. It shot forward, weaving through the fleet like a phantom, slipping through defenses as if they weren't even there. Velker's blood ran cold. This was no ordinary war. The humans had become something else. "You said." Velker stood frozen on the bridge of the Devourer, his mind racing. The human warship had just survived a direct assault from the combined firepower of the Zorath fleet. That wasn't possible. No shielding technology, no armor plating, No known defensive system could withstand such an attack, yet the warship remained untouched. It didn't even seem to react, as if their weapons were meaningless. The bridge was silent except for the hum of control panels and the quiet murmurs of terrified officers. No one dared to speak the obvious. They were outmatched. The ship moved again, not in a straight trajectory like Zorath vessels, but erratically, faster than anything their scanners could track. It weaved through their formations, slipping between ships with precision that no living pilot could achieve. Every attempt to lock onto it failed. It wasn't evading. It was toying with them. Velker's claws gripped the console so tightly his hand ached. He turned to his weapons officer. "Fire again. Everything we have." The fleet obeyed. A wall of plasma, missiles, and energy beams rained down on the lone human ship. The void between the stars burned with the sheer force of the assault. Explosions engulfed the warship, blinding their sensors with the raw brightness of destruction. But as the fire faded, it was still there, unscathed. The bridge fell into stunned silence. The second-in-command's voice was barely above a whisper. "Sir, it's not just their technology. Something else is happening." Velker could feel it too. A presence, something unnatural. Then the human warship finally responded. A single brilliant streak of energy erupted from the vessel's hull. It wasn't plasma, nor any kind of energy signature the Zorath had encountered. The beam bent and twisted, almost alive, before slamming into one of their dreadnoughts. The ship didn't explode. It vanished. No wreckage, no debris. One moment it was there. The next, it was erased from existence. Panic erupted across the fleet. Shields at full power. One officer screamed. Another shouted, "We need to fall back." Velker could feel his control slipping away. His soldiers, his entire command, were breaking. He opened his mouth to issue an order when the ship's communication screen flickered. A transmission was coming through. Against every logical instinct, Velker allowed it. The screen blinked to life, revealing a human figure. It was the same man from before, the one who had sent that eerie warning. But this time, he wasn't wearing a tattered uniform. He was standing in the center of a dark void, surrounded by shadows that moved. His eyes glowed faintly, something inhuman lurking behind them. Then he spoke. "You still don't understand, do you?" His voice was calm, but there was something ancient in it, something wrong. Velker's throat was dry, but he forced himself to answer. "What? What are you?" The human smiled. "Not what. Who?" The shadows behind him stirred. Shapes emerged, figures. Not human, not alien, but something else entirely. Something older. Velker's breath caught. "You're not alone." The human's smile widened. "We never were." And then, the warship disappeared. Not into hyperspace, not through any kind of jump drive. It simply faded, as if it had never existed. At that exact moment, Velker's ship lurched violently. The lights flickered. The control panels shorted out, sparking wildly. Officers screamed as power failed across the entire fleet. Then, one by one, the Zorath ships began vanishing. Velker's mind raced. This wasn't war. This was punishment. And humanity was delivering the final judgment. Velker clutched the edges of the command console, his mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. Ships were vanishing. Not exploding. Not retreating. Simply ceasing to exist. The Zorath fleet had been unmatched in the galaxy for centuries. They had crushed civilizations, shattered empires, reduced entire species to dust. And now, in the depths of space, in the dark abyss surrounding Earth, they were the ones being erased. "Find out what's happening." Velker barked, his voice sharper than intended. His officers frantically worked the controls, but the systems were failing. One by one, ships lost contact. No distress signals, no maydays, just static. A junior officer gasped. "Sir, the fleet count." Velker turned to the holographic display. Half the fleet was gone. His claws scraped against the console as a terrible realization crept into his mind. This wasn't a conventional battle. This wasn't an ambush. This was execution. Then the lights flickered again. The deep hum vibrated through the ship. Something unseen pressed against the hull, like a massive presence watching them from just beyond the veil of existence. And then they heard it. A whisper. Not from their communications, not from their systems. It was inside their minds. It was soft, cold, endless. Run. Velker's breath hitched. His officers froze, their faces pale, eyes wide with terror. A commander from another ship broke through the static on the comms. His voice was wrong, distorted, hollow, laced with something unnatural. "Admiral, it's inside the ship. It's in the shadows." A sharp, wet sound cut off the transmission. Then silence. Velker's scales tingled with a primal fear he hadn't felt since he was a hatchling. The human warship had disappeared, but the thing that had emerged from it, the presence that had lingered in the void, it was still here. The whispers grew louder. "Run." Velker turned to his second-in-command. "Initiate emergency retreat. Now." "But sir—" "Now." Velker roared. The ship's engines roared to life. Whatever technology still functioned was pushed to the limit as they prepared to jump to hyperspace. But as they prepared to leave, the whispers changed. They were no longer saying run. Now, they whispered something else. Too late. And then, the darkness took them. The bridge was in chaos. Officers scrambled, their claws tapping frantically at unresponsive consoles. Screens flickered, warning sirens blared, and the emergency lights bathed the command deck in a deep, ominous red. Admiral Velker stood frozen in place, his mind racing. His fleet, his invincible, unstoppable fleet, was being unmade. They had come to conquer Earth. Instead, they had awakened something else. The last few ships that remained were in full retreat, their engines burning at maximum capacity. But Velker knew the truth. There was nowhere to run. The whispers had become voices. The voices had become screams. And now, they had faces. The shadows on the bridge twisted, deepened, moved. Shapes slithered through the dim emergency lights, forming figures that were almost human. Almost. Velker's breath came in short gasps as a shape stepped forward. It was humanoid, but its form was fractured, shifting like shattered glass trying to reassemble itself. Its eyes, if they could be called that, were empty voids, filled with a nothingness that washed him back. "You shouldn't have come." The voice wasn't sound. It was inside him, vibrating through every cell in his body. Velker tried to respond, to demand answers, to plead. But his throat was locked. The shadow thing tilted its head, considering him like one might consider an insect struggling underfoot. Then it smiled. A cruel, unnatural smile. The emergency lights flickered again, and the other shadows moved. Velker's crew started screaming. Officers collapsed as the shadows touched them, their bodies crumbling into dust, dissolving into the air like they had never existed. One by one, his crew ceased to be. Velker stumbled back, his claws slipping on the cold metal floor. He had been in wars before. He had seen entire planets burn. But this was something else. This was punishment. His fleet had fired the first shot, and humanity had answered. A deep, guttural voice echoed through the bridge, ancient and absolute. "You started this war." Velker tried to run, but the moment he turned, he saw them. Hundreds of figures stood in the darkness, silent, watching, waiting. They were not human. They were something else, something older, something angry. The whisper came again, closer now, almost tender. "Now face the consequences." The last thing Velker saw before the lights died completely was the shadows reaching for him. Then, there was nothing. "You said." The void was silent. No alarms, no screams, no fleet, just an endless abyss stretching in every direction. Admiral Velker opened his eyes, Or at least, he thought he did. There was no light here. No stars. No reference point to prove he still existed. But he did exist. Didn't he? His hands, claws, whatever they were, felt wrong. His body felt disconnected, as if his limbs were moving just a fraction of a second after his thoughts. He reached forward, trying to find something, anything, to ground himself. His fingers sank into the dark. The void rippled, shifted. Then it spoke. You took, you burned, you erased. Velcor froze. The voice surrounded him, inside him, vibrating through whatever was left of his form. Now, you are nothing. A shadow peeled away from the darkness, stepping forward. It was human-shaped, but its edges flickered, shifting between existence and nothingness. Velkor's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, to beg, but he knew. There was no one left to hear him. His fleet was gone. His empire would never know what had happened. There would be no final log, no heroic stand, no legacy. The great Admiral Velkor of the Zorith Empire had become a ghost. A cold, merciless whisper wrapped around him. You wanted to know what lurked beyond your stars. The void twisted, revealing glimpses of worlds, ruined civilizations, silent battlefields, entire species erased as if they had never been. Now, you are part of it. The darkness moved. Velkor tried to run, but where could he go? The last sensation he felt was the shadows pulling him deeper. And then, like the rest of his fleet, like the countless others before him, he was gone. The awakening. The night was still as the crew of the Astronova drifted through the vast, empty expanse of space. For years, they had been following the same monotonous routine, conducting research missions across distant star systems. They had seen many strange things, but nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to find. Commander Sarah Blake stood on the bridge, staring at the monitors. The stars outside seemed to twinkle in a cold, distant rhythm, as if they were unaware of the horror that was about to unfold. The mission had started like any other, but today something was different. There was a strange signal coming from a far-off sector, a signal that shouldn't have existed. It was too strong, too deliberate. A message hidden in the static. It's coming from the uncharted zone, said Lieutenant Carter, his voice filled with a mixture of curiosity and concern. We've never picked up anything like this before. Sarah's eyes narrowed. The uncharted zone was a region of space that no one dared venture into. It was a black hole of information, a place where nothing returned. Yet here was a signal. Someone, or something, was out there, and it was calling them. Lock onto that signal, Sarah ordered, her voice calm, but there was a flicker of unease in her chest. She had learned to trust her instincts, and right now something felt wrong. The ship's engines hummed as the Astronova veered off course, heading toward the unknown. As they approached the source of the signal, the crew felt a strange tension in the air. No one spoke as they drew closer to their destination. The comms were silent, and the ship seemed to lose its sense of direction. It was as if the entire universe was holding its breath. Suddenly, a flicker appeared on the screen. A planet, dark and lifeless, orbiting a dying star. It was small, barely noticeable, but the signal was coming from there. There were no signs of life, no ships, no infrastructure, just a dead world. Yet the signal kept pulsing, insistent, like a beacon in the void. What in the galaxy? Muttered Ensign Miller from his station. He stared at the strange planet. There's no reason for this signal to exist here. Sarah stood up from her chair, her gaze fixed on the screen. Prepare for landing. We're going down. The crew moved quickly to prepare the shuttle. As they descended toward the planet, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. The planet was a barren wasteland. Jagged rocks jutted out from the surface, and a gray fog hung in the air. There was something eerie about the place, something that made every instinct in Sarah's body scream for her to turn back. But it was too late now. The shuttle touched down with a soft thud, the landing gear sinking into the dust. The crew disembarked, stepping onto the alien world. The ground was cold beneath their boots, and the air had a strange metallic scent to it. The silence was oppressive. Not a single bird, not a single insect could be heard. It was as if the world itself was dead. "Stay sharp," Sarah ordered, her voice steady. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." The crew moved cautiously toward the source of the signal. The closer they got, the more it seemed to grow louder, as if the planet itself was calling out to them. They reached a cliffside, where a strange structure stood, half buried in the dust. It was massive, towering over them like a forgotten monument from a long-lost civilization. The walls of the structure were covered in strange symbols, alien markings that none of them could recognize. It was like nothing they had ever seen before. The signal was coming from within. "We need to go inside," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't know why, but there was an overwhelming pull to enter the structure, as though something was beckoning them. As they stepped inside, the air grew colder. The walls were lined with strange, glowing patterns that illuminated the darkness. It felt as if the structure itself was alive. The crew's footsteps echoed through the halls, but no other sound could be heard. It was as if the place had been abandoned for centuries, yet the signal kept pulsing, pulling them deeper into the unknown. Finally, they reached a large chamber at the heart of the structure. In the center of the room, there was a massive console, ancient and covered in dust. It hummed with energy, and the signal was louder than ever. Sarah approached the console, her heart pounding in her chest. She hesitated, unsure of what she might find, but she knew that they had come this far. There was no turning back. With a steady hand, she reached out and touched the console. The moment her fingers made contact, the room around them seemed to shake. The walls vibrated, and the console came to life. A series of holographic images flickered into existence in front of them. Alien landscapes, strange ships, and a terrifying image of a war that had been fought across the stars. The last image was a warning, one that made Sarah's blood run cold. A message, clear and precise. "War has a price you won't survive." The message was followed by a loud, piercing sound that seemed to reverberate through the very fabric of the planet. The lights flickered and then went out. The crew was plunged into darkness. A voice echoed in the silence. "Too late," it whispered. "The price has already begun." The crew stood frozen in place, their minds racing. What had they just uncovered? Who had sent this message, and why? As they tried to process what had just happened, an overwhelming sense of dread washed over them. They were no longer alone. The darkness in the chamber was overwhelming, but the crew of the Astra Nova stood frozen, their hearts racing. The silence was suffocating, and the message that had just flashed before them, "War has a price you won't survive," repeated itself in their minds. Sarah felt the weight of those words press against her chest, as if the very air was thick with the gravity of what they had uncovered. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. The console before them had come alive the moment she touched it, revealing the holographic images of distant stars, galaxies, and what appeared to be the remnants of a massive conflict. The war wasn't just a battle of ships and weapons. It was something much darker, something that left a trail of devastation across entire civilizations. "Commander Blake," Lieutenant Carter's voice broke the silence. He was the first to speak, his voice shaking slightly. "What do we do now?" Sarah turned to him, her face set in determination. She couldn't show fear, not now. The crew was relying on her to lead them through this unknown, this uncertainty. She glanced at the others, her eyes briefly meeting each of their faces. They were all in this together. "We need to figure out what this message means," Sarah replied, her voice firm. "Whatever this war is, it's not just history. It's something ongoing, something that we're part of now." But before anyone could respond, the room shook violently. The walls trembled and the lights flickered back on, but the atmosphere in the room had changed. It was as if the planet itself had awakened, and the crew was no longer alone. "Get to the ship now," Sarah barked, as she quickly turned toward the exit. There was a sense of urgency in her voice that none of them could ignore. They had no idea what was happening, but it was clear they had triggered something they were not prepared for. The crew rushed out of the chamber, their boots clattering against the metallic floor, but as they made their way back to the shuttle, the ground beneath them began to tremble more violently. The walls, once covered in strange symbols, now seemed to glow ominously, their lights flashing in rapid succession. Something was coming. "Commander, we got incoming," shouted Ensign Miller from the rear. Sarah spun around, her hand instinctively reaching for the weapon at her side. She didn't know what they were up against, but her instincts told her they weren't about to walk out of here unscathed. A low rumble filled the air, followed by a series of loud mechanical clicks. The sound of footsteps, too heavy, too unnatural to be human, echoed from the far end of the corridor. "Move faster," Sarah shouted. They'd broke into a run, but the noise grew louder. The footsteps closer. It was as if something was stalking them, hunting them in the dark. They reached the shuttle bay, but as they approached the door, it slammed shut with a force that nearly knocked them off their feet. The lights inside the bay flickered erratically, casting long shadows that seemed to shift and stretch as though alive. "Open the door," Sarah shouted, slamming her fist against the console. But the door didn't budge. It was as if it had been locked from the inside, trapping them in a cage with something they couldn't see. The rumbling grew louder, and then it stopped, replaced by a horrible metallic screeching sound. Something massive, was moving through the ship, hunting them down, trying to separate them from the safety of the shuttle. There was no time to waste. "Everyone, to the aft door, now," Sarah ordered, her voice cutting through the panic that had begun to spread through the crew. They had no choice but to make their way to the back of the shuttle, hoping the ship's emergency systems would open a door for them. With every step they took, the tension in the air grew thicker, suffocating them. The crew could feel it. Something was coming for them, something that they had unleashed by entering this cursed place. As they moved toward the back of the shuttle, Lieutenant Carter glanced over his shoulder, and his face went pale. "We're not alone." The others turned, their weapons drawn. At the far end of the bay, a dark figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall, impossibly thin, with skin that shimmered in the dim light. It was humanoid, but its features were wrong, unnatural, twisted. The thing seemed to glide toward them, its eyes glowing with an eerie, unsettling light. Before they could react, the creature spoke, its voice low and raspy, as though it had not spoken in centuries. "You should have never come here," it hissed. "The war is already here. You are part of it now." The crew stared, frozen in fear. This was no mere alien. This was something far worse. A being born of war, something that had witnessed the destruction of countless worlds. And now it was here, on their ship, with only one purpose: to make sure that humanity paid the price for whatever they had unleashed. Sarah gripped her weapon tightly, her mind racing. This was only the beginning. Whatever had happened here, whatever war they had uncovered, it was now reaching out to them. The message was clear. Humanity was no longer just an observer. They were now a target. "Get to the shuttle," Sarah yelled, her voice cutting through the terror that gripped them. She knew they had no choice but to fight their way out. They had to escape. There was no turning back now. As the crew scattered toward the shuttle's rear hatch, they could hear the creature's footsteps behind them, growing closer with each passing second. The tension was unbearable, but in that moment, Sarah knew one thing for certain. Whatever price humanity would have to pay for this war, they would regret it for the rest of their lives. But would they even survive long enough to regret it? The shuttle's engines roared to life, pushing the Astronova out of the claustrophobic confines of the mysterious station. Sarah, gripping the controls with white-knuckled fingers, barely heard the others' frantic shouts behind her. All she could focus on was the dark figure that had emerged from the shadows. The creature's chilling words still echoed in her mind. "You are part of the war now." The shuttle's sensors flickered, and an alarm blared. The space ahead was no longer clear. There were massive ships looming in the distance, and they weren't human. Sarah squinted at the screen, her pulse quickening. "Shit, we got company," Lieutenant Carter said from behind her, his voice tight with fear. Before anyone could respond, the ship shuddered, and an explosion rattled through the hull. The craft jerked to one side, and Sarah's grip tightened instinctively, pulling the controls to steady the shuttle. "Take evasive maneuvers," Sarah barked. "Carter, check the weapons systems." The sound of scrambling filled the small cockpit as the crew hurried to do their jobs. The shuttle had been hastily refitted, with no time to ensure all systems were working perfectly. But they had no choice. Escape was their only option. They were far from prepared for a fight, but their enemies didn't seem to care about that. The crew members sat silently, every movement filled with urgency. The stars outside blurred into streaks as Sarah piloted the shuttle through the hostile fleet. Massive warships, their dark forms dwarfing the Astronova, had surrounded them, cutting off any hope of retreat. "Commander," Ensign Miller shouted, pointing at a new blip on the radar. "We've been locked onto." A low hum filled the air as Sarah slammed the shuttle into a steep dive. She could feel the gravitational force push her into the seat, her heart pounding in her chest. "Hold on," she yelled. "We'll make it through." The shuttle shook violently again as enemy fire ripped through the dark space around them. The hull groaned in protest, sparks flying from the consoles as the shields flickered in and out of life. They were being torn apart. "There's no way we're getting out of here like this," Lieutenant Carter shouted. He had reached the weapons control, but it was too late. The shuttle's defensive systems were useless against the onslaught. "Sarah," Lieutenant Carter's voice wavered with panic. "We need to turn back. We need to find a way to fight back, or we're done for." She shot him a sharp look, her jaw set with determination. "No turning back. We keep pushing forward. We can't outrun them, but maybe we can outthink them." Sarah's mind was spinning. They had no idea who these attackers were, or why they had suddenly appeared. What was this war? And why were they the ones caught in its web? Her eyes darted across the cockpit, looking for anything that might help them. They had no weapons, no advanced defenses, just a fragile shuttle against an entire fleet. But then, something caught her eye. The strange, glowing symbols from the planet station. They were etched into the shuttle's control panel, seemingly harmless at first. But now, they almost seemed alive, reacting to the chaos around them. "Wait," she murmured, reaching out to touch one of the symbols. It hummed softly under her fingertips. "Commander," Carter asked, his voice filled with confusion. "I think I can use this," she said, her voice laced with urgency. "The symbols, they are linked to the ship's systems. If we can activate them, we might be able to get a power boost. Enough to escape." The crew watched, holding their breath, as Sarah manipulated the controls. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence in the cockpit was unbearable. And then the shuttle shuddered, and the entire craft lit up, its engines roaring to life with renewed strength. The shields strengthened, flickering a brilliant blue as they absorbed the incoming fire. The ship lurched forward, pushing through the attack with surprising speed. "We're going to make it," Sarah shouted. Full speed ahead. As the Astronova sped through the enemy blockade, the crew's tension eased slightly. They were moving faster, but it was far from over. Behind them, the enemy fleet gave chase, relentless in their pursuit. "Where are they taking us?" Ensign Miller whispered, his voice barely audible over the roaring engines. "We don't know anything about this place." "Who are they?" "I don't know," Sarah replied, her voice grim. "But we need answers, and soon." The shuttle raced through the vastness of space, the dark void ahead swallowed by the distant glow of stars. But the question echoed in Sarah's mind. What war had they just stumbled into? And why had humanity's involvement been marked by such deadly consequences? As they pushed farther from the station, the crew began to realize that this was no ordinary conflict. Whatever they had awakened had consequences far beyond their comprehension. This war wasn't just about armies and weapons. It was about survival. And as they sped away from the fleet, Sarah understood one thing with certainty. Humanity had just made an irreversible decision, and there was no going back. The warning had been clear. War has a price you won't survive. But who would be left to pay that price? The Astronova pushed forward, hurtling through the void of space with a newfound burst of speed. The crew, still shaken by their near-death encounter, clung to their seats as the shuttle's engines hummed with newfound power. Sarah's hands gripped the controls tighter than ever, her mind racing. They had narrowly escaped the enemy's assault, but that was just the beginning. The crew was silent, their breaths shallow as they processed what had just happened. The sudden appearance of the enemy fleet, the cryptic message, and the terrifying creature. They were all too much to handle in such a short time. Sarah could see the strain on their faces as they tried to make sense of it all. "Commander," Lieutenant Carter said, his voice still trembling, "we need to know who's behind this. Who are we up against?" Sarah didn't answer right away. She was trying to focus, trying to make sense of the symbols she had activated earlier. They had powered up the shuttle, but there was something more to them. Something important that could be the key to understanding everything. "I'm going to try to reach out to them," she said quietly, her eyes scanning the control panel for any signs of life. The symbols pulsed again as she activated a secondary console. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the screen blinked, and a new message appeared, in a language they couldn't understand. It was a jumble of strange characters, too complex to decipher, but it felt almost familiar. Before Sarah could process it further, the communication system crackled, and a deep metallic voice filled the shuttle. The voice seemed to reverberate, as though it came from somewhere far beyond the stars. "You cannot escape," the voice said, its tone cold and commanding. "Humanity has become a part of the war that has no end. You have been chosen, and there is no turning back. Prepare yourselves." The word sent chills down Sarah's spine. "What does it mean?" She muttered under her breath. Her hands hovered over the console as she tried to access more data, but the screen flickered and went dark. "We've been chosen?" Carter asked, his voice laced with disbelief. "By whom? Why us?" "I don't know," Sarah replied, feeling the weight of the unknown pressing against her chest. "But we're in this now, whether we like it or not." The shuttle veered to the right as Sarah's instincts kicked in, narrowly dodging a blast from the enemy fleet. Her heart raced as the tension in the cockpit skyrocketed. They were still being pursued, but now it wasn't just about surviving. It was about finding answers. Sarah tried once more to reach out, hoping to decode the message, hoping to learn more about who, or what, was hunting them. The screens flickered again, and this time, another message appeared. "This war has been fought for millennia," the voice continued. "You are not the first to stand in its path, and you will not be the last. You are nothing but pawns in a game that you cannot hope to understand. You have only one choice: join the war or face extinction."